welcome to Leadership Exchange. The last couple of weeks back, we met the other leaders on the show. So on that, we had three leaders who were talking about leadership exchange on the peripheral side of it, where they were talking about values, discipline, alignment, and how they show up as a leader. So here today we explored something most leadership spaces avoid. What happens when their values and leadership stop aligning? Today, I want to take a little step further because presence is not only one thing. Presence is not about confidence, it's not about visibility, it's definitely not about performance. Presence is layered. And here it lists us how a leader thinks, how a leader performs, or how a leader holds themselves, be it in the form of a decision, be it in terms of paralysis, be it in terms of goal attainment, and how they're experienced as a leader by others. And what I see in my work is leaders are very strong in one particular dimension, but they over rely on that particular dimension, and that was causes a really big imbalance, and they start shaping up how the others are perceived in a different zone altogether, how they show up, what they are, and what they resiliate, what they are emotionally, and what they are rationally, and what they are socially really mean. So today we are not going to define really what presence looks like it, but we're going to examine it, where it holds, and where it really breaks. So we have three dimensions in depth today, that is about rational, emotional, and the structural piece, social piece of it. Let's step in into this by introducing our three guests today on our Leadership Exchange platform. We have Gaston, we have James, I call him Jamie, but we have Afshin as well. So Gaston, you work at the intersection of systems, structure, and organizational design, bring a lens that most leaders naturally see. That presence is not personal. It is shaped by the architecture around them. I'm really looking forward to see Gaston, where you're going to take to us in these deep discussion with us today. Welcome, Gaston.
Thanks, Husnas, for having us and having me. Yeah, happy to be here to talk about the executive presence and connecting and having the conversation with Jamie and Afshin too about
Sure,
it.
welcome. Afshin, her work sits in the emotional reality of leadership, especially for leaders who are navigating complexity that often gets unspoken. You bring the depth up that moves the conversation beyond theory into the lived experiences. I'm so glad to have you, Afshin. Welcome.
Thank you, Husna. It's a pleasure to be here. And, not to mention, thank you for initiating this and putting us all together in this group.
Thank you, Afshin. I wouldn't call James, but I would call Jamie because I'm more comfortable calling Jamie more. Jamie brings a rational, relational, and social dimension of leadership. We have had so many conversations about that, and where presence is not what a leader intends to be, but what actually lands with others. That translation between the internal clarity and the external impact is where your work is so powerful, Jamie. Great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Husna. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to get to share this time with all three of you. And do always call me Jamie. Nobody calls me James. So,
Thank you, Jamie. Alrighty, so today I would not say that we're going to follow a segment wise. Today we are going to follow something called pillars, which my leaders thought, okay, Husna, we're going to talk about this in more details. I would call it as pillars as they say it. So, Gaston, I would like to ask you, how does this deep domain expertise contribute to a leader's presence in a room? Does knowing your stuff actually change how you carry yourself?
That's a great question, Husna. And when we were talking with Afshin and Jamie about this topic, and you mentioned the layers, right? So these are kind of layers that are intertwined, that are connected, that are integrated, and the challenge is for each leaders in defining their executive presence, how these three layers blend, right? What is the outcome of this blend, of this particular mix and unique mix that each of us has, right? So in this sense, the rational layer, the rational component could be certainly very tied to what is the experience, what is the actual stuff that we do when we work in an organization, whether we work in finance, whether we work in sales, commercial, marketing, production, logistics, anything that you do as a leader, as a leader of people, a leader of organizations, is grounded in your expertise. We have, all of us probably studied long hours for many, many years to get this level of expertise, whether at university, college, certifications, postdocs, masters, etc., etc. So there's certain power in that. There's an effort behind that. There's an investment behind that, and certainly when you are in the leadership role, this is when you put that knowledge into to work, right? You put it into the table, and to try to see how this can get you where you want to go, right? It will open doors, it will open opportunities for you, it will open conversations. You will feel confident certainly about the topic at hand, how you present, what your opinions. Leaders have opinions and voice their opinions, and they need to persuade. So having this long knowledge, certainly from the rational side of things, is certainly an asset, I believe.
There's quite a lot of interesting things you brought about in terms of different industries, different organizations, certifications, experiences, on all of that. What I hear is something I see often with very senior leaders these days. Expertise does not build capability, it changes how a leader occupies space. And before a leader speaks in the room, they already have decided how to read them. And that is where presence begins. Not exactly in words, but in the perception of so many. Moving into Afshin, I have something to talk to you about resilience. We often hear about resilience, but what does that look like in a leader's presence? Is it about being stoic or is it something else?
Thank you for the question, Husna. It's really, yeah, I mean, when you say it, if it's a stoic, in a way, it may come across as a stoic on the outside, but it's not really that mysterious or philosophical as we may think of it. Resilience in leadership presence is about a leader's ability to manage their emotions effectively, to manage their time effectively, or learning from their mistakes or adapting to new circumstances and so on and so forth. So these abilities are important because a leader's mood and their abilities really are infectious, and that can impact the people that they lead, and it has a very powerful effect on the workplace that can either lead to productive or unproductive teams. So resilience, yeah, it may come across as stoic, but really it's about building your abilities and not so much about spending time on meditating and being spiritual in that sense.
There's a lot of thread which you tied in together, Afshin. I feel that there's something very, very important here, but what I noticed in your conversation, it's about resilience is often misunderstood as a control or dominance, right? So, but what actually holds in leadership is not control, it's the emotional steadiness without disconnection, and that is the very big kind of strength which a leader must have. As you spoke about how they show up in the mood, in the way they're disturbed, and how they manage the team in that is very equally important, and when they are emotionally tied down in their presence. Thank you, Afshin. And coming to Jamie, when you hear social presence, a lot of leaders picture the charismatic extrovert working the room. What might be getting wrong, and what is the social presence mean really at the executive level? When you hear social presence, Jamie, many leaders default to the image of a charismatic extrovert walking the room.
It's one of those, I think, common misconceptions, right? Sometimes leaders are, a charismatic individual who is a natural extrovert who is comfortable in those situations working the room. But that's not always it. There's a good number of us who are introverts, and introversion and extroversion, again, sometimes are seen as a signal, the extroversion side, as what people think of for executive presence. And that's really, a misnomer in my opinion. because the way that you show up as a leader in terms of your social presence, it really has everything to do with how you make others feel. Do they feel heard, understood, seen, engaged? Because that is going to be something that really allows you to draw people in. Leaders can't, by fiat, not effectively at least, dictate what it is that they expect people to do. They have to be able to draw people in, but that requires them making sure people feel seen and understood. And that's what starts to build trust. Those are the types of leaders people gravitate to when they feel as though there's somebody that really recognizes who they are and what they can contribute. So the whole extroversion, introversion, that charismatic leader that knows how to work a room. Again, there's a place for that in some contexts, but most leaders don't need to be thinking of it that way. They really need to think about how they can listen, how they can understand and value others.
It's exactly so true when you say that. The trust what we build, the emotional, it's not about resistance, it's how you resiliate with yourself, with your thought, with your processing, and how you give that space to other team members is so important. And that's what it builds trust. It's not about how you are as a personality, as a trait, what you carry as an extrovert or an introvert. It's about how you show up, how you make others
Mhm.
feel, and how you are as a leader that could really giving space not only to yourself but also to the other team members. That builds a lot of trust that is so valuable. So thank you, Jamie, for sharing that piece of yours information with us. This is where I see many leaders misreading themselves, actually. So presence is not about being noticed, it's about making an impact, and that adds value. It's about what shifts in the room because you are there, and that shift is not personality, it is awareness. So as we have concluded first pillar, we're going to go a little bit more deeper with our leaders and guests present today. Gaston, I would like to go back with you asking, in a crisis, we look for a system. How do the leader's ability to build the logical frameworks provide psychological safety for a team?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a interesting question. I think it ties also with some of the things that Afshin and Jamie were mentioning, right? So this stoicism that Afshin was mentioning, this perception of stoicism, and they have to uh, get everyone through the storm. This is kind of one perception, and sometimes this creates an additional tension for the leaders in a crisis, right? Even though they may want to face it in focus on solutions, try to navigate and take everyone to a safe place, it's challenging because the subjacent emotions, feelings, perceptions, their own sense of vulnerability, the fear of the unknown, difficult situations, and the challenge there is how to prepare for that, right? And you can prepare from a rational side, of course, understanding or trying to figure out what are your tricks, yeah, what are the tricks that you have in your sleeve to cope with these situations normally. What are the resources that you have, in the sense the people that you have, the tools that you have, the budgets that you have? What are the things that you can put in and bring in and in order to cope with this crisis? But there's also the most important part for me in a crisis is understanding themselves, how they are, how they feel about the situations, and what uh, behaviors they tend to exhibit to show when they are in a crisis. Where is the safe place, right? There's a lot of talking about the dark side in some cases, or where are the comfort zones. So where are these places where we will tap into our strengths and maybe overdo it in a crisis moment, right? So there's two things here. So there's the self-awareness of how you react with crisis, and there's also acknowledging that crisis right now in the context that we have are more common than they used to be. And you have all sorts of crises. You have from micro crisis to big crisis, and everyone has to get ready for that. And again, the leader may have some sort of a broader and bigger responsibility, but the most important thing is they don't have to think that they are alone, right? Part of this impact that they create in the world is also how the work in reverse shapes them. What is the impact that reflects on their impact, right? They are molding the reality, they are shaping their teams, but on the same time, their teams, the reality is shaping them back.
Absolutely, that piece. I simply love what you just said, Gaston. as much as the leaders shape the team are also shaping the leader who they are. Like, for example, I always tell in a coaching conversation, it's not about the client and you, it's what you learn as a coach as well, which makes a really big growth in your own perspectives and the way you handle your own leadership. So what stand out to me in this conversation was people don't just look for answers in a crisis. They look for structure that they can really, really trust. And when the structure is missing, even strong leaders start to feel very uncertain. So now going to Afshin. Afshin, you advocate for vulnerability as a leadership tool. How can a leader be vulnerable without losing the authority we just discussed in the rational pillar?
Yeah, it's a lot of people consider vulnerability for a weakness. And really, I love this definition by Brené Brown. She explains vulnerability as the most accurate measure of courage. And that really sums it up, because a lot of the time leaders believe or think that showing up as they are, opening up or sharing that they also feel uncertain, to Gaston's point, in crisis or in situations that are out of control, they that can come across as it's a weakness, but it really is where you show good leadership presence. This is where you show that you also are a human being, and at the end of the day, that's something that is also impacting you. So that's your ability to really open up in a way that actually works for you as a leader, and showing up even when you don't know how things will turn out. And so vulnerability doesn't take away from authority. It actually builds the authority. So as Gaston has pointed out, that a lot of leaders have good competence and skills, and they are very well trained and trusted. They have credibility. So all these factors that matters as a leader are there. But how do they maintain that? How do they keep this authority alive? Because the title gives you that, the status gives you that, but it doesn't stay like that if you're not able to put that to use. So that's really where it comes to expression, where you're able to, as a leader, show vulnerability and show authority through your actions. You do that by proving through your behavior what you're doing, acting with integrity and delivering results over time, is what actually keeps that authority maintained. So it's not just something that you have or you don't have. It's a matter of building it and keeping it, and making or doing it better for every day, really.
Inhabiting it, basically. It doesn't come like, it comes a day with the daily practice. It comes with the daily improvement. It comes with the daily mind shift, like what when we use all the coaching language possible. So here, Afshin, thank you for sharing such a great insight about how vulnerable a leader could help really perform better, and not only perform better, how they can stand for themselves, for the team in that context. Here, I'd like to share a very small example of my own personal experience. So when I was coaching one senior executive, the conversation became so real when I have to really pause and think through it. Is in my coaching work, as I said, I met a very senior executive who was consistently being told how she should show up, how she should be changing, how her voice should be is not really heard, how she should be speaking more and be more visible. And yet her results, quarter to quarter were really, really exceptional. They were not looking at how she's performing, but the simple thing was all about the perception, how the others are perceiving how she is and what she is, and that they're really putting an unsurmountable pressure on how she should be. So once I asked her one simple question: what is that you want to change about yourself that will help leaders change their perception of you? So that question really changed some really deep thing in her. She stopped performing. She started leading from where she actually was, and that really shifted a lot. People started hearing her more, not because she was talking more, because she stopped trying to be somebody else to match somebody's energy and somebody else's expectations out of her in the room. And that's what really makes a difference. Presence is not about what you project, it's about what others feel when you stop performing. It's about how you are, what you are. Be vulnerable. Be show up to your traits, to your personality, so that you learn and your teams learn with you. Alrighty, so then going to Jamie. Inside a leader's own team, what is the shift from running a team to building a network of collaboration? And what does it actually look like in a typical team interaction?
It's a great question. And this ties into, just the theme we've been on now for a couple of minutes. A lot of the times, I think we've all seen it and experienced it with clients or those that we've worked with. Leaders feel as though they need to be the person running everything, in control of everything, involved in every decision, etc. Right? And that's not really it. This ties in specifically with the vulnerability piece and knowing how you're impacting things that Gaston and Afshin have already talked about, and that you were just echoing, Husna, is a leader shouldn't be the hub in a hub and spoke system. Instead, they really should be the connector across their team. And I think to experience that I've had in my most recent role, where this is something that naturally occurred, but it was a really strong lesson learned for me around having a large team of people with geographic dispersion. We were all working remotely. So that creates its own silos. But then within that, we had specialty teams for different business lines and areas of the organization, organizational development versus effectiveness versus talent development and training. So we had all of these divisions across the team. And typically, we've all seen leaders, run a team in a structure like that with some complexity in a very particular way, where they are at the center, they are the decision maker, everything runs through them, which, can be necessary in some situations for some types of work. But in most contexts, when you think of different projects team members are working on, as for instance, there's going to be a lot of interconnectivity where they need to be able to collaborate effectively. And a leader's role in that is to really make sure they are connecting people and the understanding of what it is that they're actually trying to accomplish, the work they're doing, why they need to know each other, why they need to support each other. I think that's a really critical thing for any good leader to be able to do, because the benefit of that isn't just that you get better outcomes, but it's also that you're acting as a broker almost, for the different individuals in your team, and keeping them connected with intention, so that when you're not available, they know how to collaborate together and make effective decisions because they have clarity around what needs to be accomplished and the things that they're trying to achieve. It doesn't all need to rest on the leader's shoulders. This ties into burnout and so many other things that we all, have talked about ad nauseum. But I think that's the responsibility leaders need to be thinking about intentionally. And it does require being vulnerable, thinking about how it is that they're really showing up, that they aren't the only person that can make decisions and direct work. Team members share that responsibility, and they should be given that autonomy, but they have to have the clarity that comes with that to be effective in doing so.
That's very, very interesting. A lot of things you tied up, Jamie. Shared leadership and micromanagement. These are certain things which really comes up in a lot of times when we don't let the team to be what they are and how they want to be. And that comes with vulnerability. Unless we show how we are and how we tie up to that relationship piece. When we need help and we need support, our team can take care of so many things on other back end support. So thank you, Jamie. That was very, very insightful from the HR perspective, and you as a leader and you as a coach, as I've known you. And the way you put it up was very, very streamed and thin lined into the perception of what we just spoke. So this is where the leadership becomes bigger than the individual. If everything starts depending on the leader, there's no system, there's no dependency, and real presence creates something at that continuation, even when the leader is not in the room. Thank you, Jamie. That was really, really awesome. Now, moving to the next part of the pillar, I would like to ask Gaston again. Is there a danger in being too rational? At what point does logic stop being a strength and start becoming a wall?
I think that with every excess, there's risks, right? So don't overdo it, is what the people tend to say, right? So too much of anything is not good. So being too rational can take us into places that we, as a leader, we might detach from the other aspects and components of the system, right? So from the emotions, from the social aspects of that, these are actually can take us into a place that we shut ourselves as leaders, and we are trying to solve the problem no matter what, regardless of the consequences, and that certainly will impact our presence, the impact that we do on others, our reputation, right? And this could be turning points actually. So rationality by itself, certainly not good. It has to be blended and combined, as we were saying and we were showing, with emotions, with the social aspect, the interpersonal relationships, and the broader system, of course. So I think that too much rational is not good. It's not good.
Well, I hear from all three of you today something very, very, which I'd like to bring a highlight to personal relationship, interpersonal relationship. We all spoke about emphasizing a lot on not how you show up as a leader, but how building the relationships at every stage, not only with your team, but also with your counterparts and counterpartners is equally important. How you show up and how you're heard, how you're seen, and that starts with emotional intelligence and how you show up in a social atmosphere, as well as how being a rational, not really being a decision maker, is not going to be worth it unless you have all of the three pieces tied together. So when logic becomes protection, leaders stop engaging with they cannot control, and that is where presence starts to narrow down. Now, going to Afshin, how do a leader's core values act as a compass that others can actually feel when they walk into the room?
I'd love to answer that question, but just before I do that, I really would love to, point out something Gaston and Jamie just shared, because I really feel that although there is a lot of focus on the rational aspect and also on the social aspect of a leader's presence, the emotional aspect or the emotional intelligence is actually quite underrated. It's considered as something that is a soft skill, and people tend to see that this is not something you can build or work on. But really, it is the key, it is the glue that makes all of this tie together. Because if you have the competence but you can't apply it, it's going to be, limited. And leaders tend to actually focus more on the competence and on building the vision and strategizing, or even showing up on the social events and doing the things that they consider as important part of being a leader. But if they don't have what it takes to be really present in these social gatherings, or really able to apply what you learn in a way that is also influencing people in a positive way, it's actually helping the team to work together and also to respect the leader while he's not there, is what emotional aspect really does to it. So having said that, I really see the core values as the compass, because and I would love to quote Stephen Covey here, who is a world-renowned author writing the book The 7 Habits of Effective Leadership. He mentions this topic about leaders focus on the personality aspect more than the character of the leader, and that's where I think the core values really play a very important role. Personality being how you are showing yourself in these different situations, with your team, or in social gatherings, or showing up, and we talk about leaders' presence in terms of how they are seen from the outside. But the character part is not seen. It's not something you can touch on and say, this is the character of the leader. But it is definitely felt. It is values such as, having integrity, showing up with courage and being vulnerable. And all those values are what people see and take after, and they are then able to work better together, or have that kind of respect for the leader. So I really think that the core values are the compass that people look for in an organization working with a leader.
That's very, very, very interesting and very deeply emotional connect which you made with the internal leader of you and how you show up as the external leader. That alignment of your own thought process within and the alignment of how you show up is equally important and plays a greater role how and what a leadership demonstrates to be. Because values, that's why we say we name values and how we demonstrate how we show up because that's how it really puts you up into a personality. That's what it builds your leadership style. And that's what I feel as a person, as a leader, as a coach, has seen come across many things like that. Unless you are aligned with your own thought process, unless you are aligned with your own values and discipline, you cannot show up what kind of a leader you are. So these are what others experiences consistently about you. And that consistency is what is building up called what Jamie put up, trust. So now coming back to you, Jamie, most senior leaders say that they hate networking, but the research on executive trajectory is pretty clear that external relationships do matter. So how do you help a coaching client who's averse to networking build an external presence that feels authentic?
To me, it's just such a simple answer to start, is stop thinking of it as networking. Start thinking of it as investing time in cultivating relationships, right? Because I think everybody listening, and I think all four of us can attest to the fact that oftentimes as a leader, your greatest opportunities, for a role, whether internally at another organization, whatever, they come through our networks, as a for instance, which I think is just an example of the relationships we build. It's not about networking for the sake of it, that performative act. It's about investing our time in getting to know other people and build meaningful relationships. But, as part of that, what I always try to focus my clients to get to think, aside from let's reframe it, not networking, it's building relationships, it's cultivating those relationships with intention. It's also about stop thinking about what you're going to get out of a particular relationship that you're developing with somebody and just focus on, to start, what is it that you can contribute? Because if you're doing that with generosity and you're contributing to that relationship, it builds trust. It also shows who you are and that you care, and it makes other people want to connect with you. So it's not about you going out and seeking, it's about you trying to offer something. And through doing that, people typically tend to return that generosity of spirit in kind, and they also try to help you. So the other thing that I talk to a lot of clients about, who most of my clients are averse to the idea of networking, either for the sake of it because they just are uncomfortable, or it's not something that they feel that they have time for, so trying to make sure they also understand this is necessary to be a highly effective leader, especially if you do have an interest in pursuing that executive trajectory and moving up through an organization and different types of responsibilities. You need a good network of people to help support you in that growth. And so I oftentimes will go through the exercise with clients that I want them once a week to intentionally schedule time with someone that's outside their team, outside their organization, try to meet someone new. And again, don't focus on what is it that I'm going to get out of this. It's what can I offer to them? And try to be able to build those relationships. Not every one of those conversations is going to turn into something meaningful long term, and that's okay, because to some degree it's a numbers game. But if you start doing that regularly and make it a discipline and a practice, you're going to begin to develop this great network of people who are like-minded, who can support your growth and whose growth you can support. And having that outside your team, outside of your organization, is something that's going to pay dividends years down the road. It always does, without fail. And so that's an exercise I like to work on with my clients.
Wow, that's really, really something to look forward to. And actually, that should become a practice from everywhere. And I think me and Jamie have discussed so much about the HR practices which need to change to a larger extent when the people start to recognize what is important from that networking piece. Lunch, we have spoken about lunch. We have a lunch frame. We have a lunch hour for the leaders. But what I see most of the time is the leaders are eating at their desk, or either eating with their own counterparts, or either eating with their own senior executives. What about their team? I always encourage leaders to make a connection with the team during the lunch hour. Try to have lunch with them. That builds networking. That builds a relationship. that really helps you work towards your own goals and break the perception of you as well as your team. So this is where we see a lot of shift. The resistance is not to connect, it's not to perform, but a connection which becomes genuine for you to present, expand naturally. Now, moving on to something which is very common for all of you, I'd like to bring in all three of you into this conversation now. What happens to a leader who's 100% rational but 0% emotional? If someone is listening and feels they are strong in one area but weak in another, what is the first step to balancing the trade? Jamie.
Mm. If you have a leader that's focusing exclusively on the rational side of things, and they're not, uh, EQ is not front of mind for them, and how they affect other people and how they show up. I mean, it really is that you're focusing on what you're doing, not how you're going about it. You're going to meet with very limited success. So, and actually, I think you put it well earlier when you talked about how important EQ is, and it's that underlying component. And it's because it's not it's not the obvious thing to observe or to measure in a lot of contexts. And so again, we focus on what we see or what we can measure versus how we go about doing it, which that's where emotional intelligence is really the thing, the engine that's driving that. And so it's a recipe for disaster, to answer your question. If the leader's focusing exclusively on the rational and not on the EQ, that's not going to prove to be successful long term. It might have some short term success, but it's going to be something that's going to limit them. And they've got to focus on trying to elicit feedback from others, trying to be cognizant and thinking about how they're impacting other people if they want to change that. Because emotional intelligence, as F. Shiever said, you can develop that. It just requires the desire to do it and being aware both of your own behaviors as well as how your behaviors impact other people, and being willing to make changes so that you can adapt to those different situations and dynamics.
Wow. There
Yeah,
was a lot
and
in that.
Sorry.
Afshin.
I just wanted to add to what Jamie just shared because, of course, I agree with everything he said in terms of having focus on the rational aspect and forgetting about the emotional. It's just like, you can have as many certifications or degrees or whatever you can available, but if they are not put to use, they are not going to benefit anybody, not the leader himself. And what the sad part of the emotional intelligence is, unfortunately, is that you don't learn it in theory. You have to practice it. And a lot of the time, this happens at workplace in real time with people in situations that are happening, in stressful situations and things that are out of your control and that are uncertain. And with that, you have to learn by, going as, you learn as you go. And that doesn't have to necessarily be a difficult thing if you work with somebody to help you understand your own behavior, become self-aware and be able to manage yourself and showing up much more authentically than the way we are taught, say, in these leadership courses where everything is so, it can sometimes feel like it's constructed. And I know a lot about various leadership styles and because I've learned it. But what you don't learn is what happens in workplace, and that's where I think also the role of coaches come in, where we go and meet the clients where they are at with what the challenge they are experiencing in the moment, and we work from that point and onwards instead of focusing on telling the whole story about what leadership is, how charismatic leadership shows up, and so on and so forth. That's not so much about that, and that's what happens when you focus on one aspect and forget about the main aspect, I would say.
Gaston, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that this conversation is interesting about how there's not one without the other. There's not the internal side without the emotions, without the social aspects. Is that like I always say, like it's the leadership is how you would like to mold yourself, how do you want to build yourself, but it's also that you are shaping others and others are shaping you. So understanding those dynamics, those tiny nuances, and embracing those, and making sure that uh, all of that makes you better. The rational part, the emotional side, the social side, all of that helps you improve as a leader, as long as you're aware of that. And embracing those areas. And yeah, maybe you are over emotional, maybe you are antisocial, or maybe you are leaning too much on rationality. And that's okay. You had to find your own recipe, those are your ingredients, and eventually you can create great dishes to serve to your team and to your organization.
Very interesting. So I'd like to conclude this leadership exchange talk with you guys with one last question, which should be in one word. Just say that in one word or at the most one sentence. In today's remote or hybrid world, which of these three pillars has become the most difficult and most important to maintain? We'll start with Afshin.
Yeah, I would take it back to the emotional pillar, I think, because really AI is, making it very much possible for you to look up for any information you want. You can create things quite, fast, and there is no lack of information. It's a lack of human aspect of people, or the emotional aspect of people that people are missing on workplaces. So for me, that's the word. Sorry, it was more than one sentence or one answer.
Mm-hmm. Gaston.
Well, I will agree with Afshin. I think that emotions, these are harder to convey through the screen, through the virtual connection, and more challenging to build. It's possible, but it maybe requires more commitment and investment.
Hmm. Last but not the least, Jamie.
I will say ditto to what Ashley and Augustine have said, but I'll also add this little extra piece of just being in a hybrid situation. You don't have the informal connection that we used to have when we were in the office and sharing physical space, right? The water cooler chats, the hallway chats. So you have to be intentional, I think would be the word that I'd throw in, as my keyword. You really have to intentionally find opportunities to build those relationships, focus on connecting with people and making sure that they see you and you see them the way you hope they would.
Hmm. Very, very interesting. Thank you all. So before we come to a close, I'd like to share from my inside board what I have to share with my audience and the leaders today is what makes a leader presence felt before they even speak. It's not the title. It's not the track record. It's not the room they walk into. It is something far more layered, far more earned, as far more difficult to hold together when the stakes are high and the pressure is for real. So, what we explored today is this: presence is not built in isolation, it is shaped across three dimensions: how a leader thinks, how he holds or how she holds themselves, and how a leader is experienced by others: the rational, the emotional, and the social. And the leaders who sustain presence over time are not the ones who project the most. They are the ones who have done the most honest work within. And here is the part we must be willing to see. Not every leader is perceived the same way. Presence is just not internal, it is interpreted. And until we acknowledge that, we are not developing leaders. We are asking them to perform. So I want to leave you with something very simple. Before our next leadership moment, pause and ask yourself: am I aligned? Is what am I going to bring into the space consistency with what I actually believe? Am I present? Not performing calm, not projecting authority. Actually, here am I honest with myself and with the people around me. And this is where the real leadership presence begins, not in what you project, but in what remains with you when you stop performing. The moment you stop performing, leadership is the moment leadership actually begins. I'm Husna Saeda. This is Leadership Exchange for you. Stay connected, stay tuned. Thank you, leaders, for the wonderful, wonderful, awesome conversation we shared today in terms of rational, emotional, and social. Thank you once again. Take care. See you all soon. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.